A girl like you? No way. The sun peeked through the tall buildings of downtown as 13-year-old Jessica Williams stepped off the city bus, her heart beating faster than usual. The towering glass of First National Bank reflected the morning light, casting long shadows on the sidewalk as professionals in suits rushed by with coffee in hand and Bluetooth earpieces, buzzing with financial chatter. Jessica paused for a moment and looked up at the name on the building. First National. She had researched it carefully online. This wasn't just any bank, it was the biggest one in the city. Clean, secure, highly rated. The perfect place, she thought, to open her very first checking account. She had dreamed of this moment for weeks, saving her birthday money from Grandma, counting her allowances, carefully gathering her documents like a tiny executive preparing for her first board meeting. Dressed neatly in her school uniform from Westfield Prep, the most elite school in the city, Jessica stood straight, held her chin high, and clutched her envelope of $800 like it was a golden ticket. What Jessica didn't know, what she could never have imagined, was that this ordinary Tuesday would become the most terrifying day of her young life. The moment she walked through those tall glass doors, the world would stop seeing her as a child and start treating her like a threat. And the very place she came to feel like a responsible young adult would soon become a battlefield of prejudice, injustice, and power. And in the end, the people who judged her the most would regret everything. Inside the bank, the air was crisp, with a soft scent of leather and wood polish. Elegant chandeliers hung above polished marble floors, and the quiet murmur of financial transactions hummed like background music. Older clients waited patiently in the lounge, sipping complimentary coffee while tellers smiled politely and typed rapidly behind their counters. Jessica clutched her envelope tighter as she stepped forward toward the customer service counter. She had rehearsed this. She knew what to say. She had read all about checking accounts, bank forms, and interest rates. She was ready, but readiness meant nothing to the woman sitting behind the glass. Jennifer Adams glanced up from her computer with tired eyes, her fingers frozen mid-click as she saw Jessica approach. Her face changed, not with surprise, but with suspicion. Her brows furrowed slightly as if Jessica's presence in this space was somehow a violation of order. "Yes?" she said, her voice clipped, lacking even the faintest note of welcome. Jessica smiled, unaware of the storm brewing on the other side of the desk. "Hi," she said politely. "I'm here to open a checking account. I have everything I need." She opened her backpack and gently pulled out her school ID, her birth certificate, her savings account paperwork, and of course the thick envelope of carefully counted birthday money. Jennifer's gaze fell on the money first. Her nostrils flared. Then she looked back at Jessica's face, and her lip curled, not with amusement but disgust. "You're opening an account?" she asked, almost laughing. "With that?" Jessica blinked, her smile faltering. "Yes," she replied, still trying to stay polite. "It's birthday money from my grandma. I saved it all year. And I already have a savings account here. I just want to open a checking account today." Jennifer leaned back in her chair and crossed her arms. "And where exactly did you get that uniform?" she asked coldly. "Because I know Westfield Prep doesn't just accept anyone." Jessica's mouth opened in confusion. "My mom enrolled me. I've been there since 5th grade. Jennifer scoffed. "Sure, and I suppose your grandma just walks around handing out envelopes of cash, huh?" "Look, sweetie, this is a real bank. We don't play games here. I'm calling my manager." The words stung. Jessica could feel the heat rising in her face, but she nodded quietly. "Okay," she said softly. "She can help, maybe." Jennifer picked up the phone and dialed with exaggerated urgency. "Sharon, I need you at window 3. We have a situation." Minutes later, Sharon Mitchell arrived. Tall, pale, and dressed in a perfectly tailored pantsuit, Sharon moved with the kind of confidence that came from 2 decades of authority. She didn't smile. She didn't greet Jessica. She didn't even pretend to care who this young girl was. She simply looked her up and down like a store detective sizing up a shoplifter. "Shouldn't you be in school?" Sharon said, not even introducing herself. Her voice was sharp, more interrogation than inquiry. Jessica cleared her throat, trying not to sound nervous. "I have a note," she said, reaching into her backpack. "It's signed by my counselor. My mom knew I was coming here. She helped me get everything together." Sharon snatched the paper from her hand and glanced at it without reading. Then her eyes flicked back to the envelope of cash. "You brought a lot of money with you for someone your age," she said slowly. "Where exactly did this come from?" Jessica felt her hands begin to shake. "I told the other lady it's birthday. Money and some savings? My grandmother always gives me a lot, and I've been saving for a year." "Grandmothers don't just give children hundreds of dollars in cash," Sharon replied coldly. "Especially not girls like you." There it was, girls like you. Jessica had heard those words before in movies, in documentaries, in speeches. From history class, but this was different. This was real. This was happening to her. "I didn't steal it," Jessica said quietly. "It's mine. I just want to open an account." Sharon shook her head. "I don't believe you. I think this money is stolen. Or you're being used by adults to bring stolen cash into our bank. Either way, I'm not falling for your story." Jessica felt her throat close up. "Please," she said, her voice cracking. "Can I just call my mom?" "No," Sharon said sharply. "You're not making any calls." "I'm calling the police." Jessica froze. "What?" "You heard me," Sharon said, picking up the phone. "We have procedures for this kind of thing. We don't let scammers play the victim. I'm calling this in as attempted fraud." Jessica's vision blurred. "Please," she begged. "I didn't do anything wrong." But Sharon wasn't listening. She had already dialed. "Yes, I need officers sent to First National Bank downtown," she said calmly into the phone. "We have a juvenile suspect in possession of suspected stolen funds. She's becoming uncooperative. Yes, black female. Approximately 13. Yes, we'll hold her here." Jessica backed away from the counter, her breathing quick and shallow. This couldn't be happening. This wasn't some movie. This wasn't a story about someone else. This was her life. And none of the other customers, none of the other tellers was stepping forward to stop it. She pulled out her phone, her fingers trembling. She opened the Messages app and typed with shaking hands, "Mom, I'm at the bank." They called. "The police on me." "I'm scared." Then she hit send. It would be the most important message she'd ever write. And across the city, in a gleaming glass tower high above the skyline, a phone buzzed on a polished boardroom table. A powerful woman would read the message. And everything in that bank was about to change. The message that shook the boardroom on the 42nd floor of the Williams Financial Tower, nestled among other steel and glass giants piercing the city's sky. Dr. Angela Rodriguez Williams sat at the head of a sleek, walnut conference table, surrounded by her executive team. The boardroom gleamed with quiet power-glass walls overlooking the skyline, whiteboards filled with expansion plans and screens displaying live financial markets across continents. Angela, calm and sharp as always, was deep in discussion with 5 top executives, negotiating the final stages of a $90 million merger that would make headlines by morning. Her tailored navy suit hugged her frame with authority. Her hair was pulled back into a neat bun, and a diamond-encrusted watch of family heirloom glimmered faintly on her wrist as she tapped a pen to the contract in front of her. To the outside world, Angela was everything CEO, visionary, mother, and heir to the Rodriguez financial dynasty. But to Jessica, she was simply Mom, the woman who packed her lunch, sat through school plays, and taught her to lead with heart. Suddenly, a soft vibration buzzed against the polished wood. Angela's phone lit up. She rarely allowed messages to interrupt meetings, especially not deals of this size, but this buzz was different. A unique tone she had programmed years ago for one person only. Jessica, instinct kicked in, faster than reason. She picked up the phone. And as her eyes moved across the glowing screen, the change in her expression was so sharp, so immediate, that everyone at the table fell silent. The deal, the signatures, the screens, they all ceased to matter. Angela's features turned stone cold, her lips pressed tightly together, and her hand clenched the phone with a white-knuckled grip. A single message, One line. And it was enough to shatter the illusion of calm. "Mom, I'm at the bank. They called the police on me. I'm scared." Time stopped. The men and women sitting around her suddenly looked like statues, unsure of what to do, what to say, how to breathe. This wasn't just the CEO of a multi-billion-dollar firm getting a text. This was a mother receiving a cry for help. This was a lioness being told her cub was in danger. Angela didn't raise her voice. She didn't slam the table. But her next words were like bullets, soft and dangerous. "This meeting is over." Her tone carried no room for protest. She stood so swiftly that her chair rolled into the wall behind her. "James." She called toward the hallway, and almost instantly, her driver stepped into the doorway, startled by her tone. "Bring the car around, now." Then, with practiced efficiency, she made 3 calls, each one taking no more than 15 seconds. The first went to David Chun, her private attorney known for crushing corporate lawsuits with precision. The second to Robert Torres, her head of security and former police captain. The third went to Charles Morrison, the chairman of First National Bank's board of directors. She said only 3 words to him: "She's at your bank." That was all he needed to hear. Outside the boardroom, her staff watched with wide eyes as Angela marched through the hallway like a storm on heels, her face unreadable, her movements sharp. The calm, elegant executive they all admired had transformed into something else, something colder, fiercer, and far more terrifying. She wasn't going to make a scene. She was going to make history. Downstairs, James had the Bentley idling at the curb before she even stepped outside. Robert Torres was already waiting inside, checking his watch. "Is she safe?" he asked. "She's scared," Angela replied, sliding into the back seat, "and they're about to learn who she is." Meanwhile, at First National Bank, Jessica stood in the same spot, feeling smaller with every second. Her wrists trembled, her cheeks were still wet from tears. The air inside the bank felt colder now, heavier, like it was filled with judgment. Around her, customers avoided eye contact. Some watched in silence, others whispered. No one stepped in. Not even when the police arrived? 2 uniformed officers entered through the main doors with the slow confidence of men who believed they were always right. Officer Bradley Walsh, a 15-year veteran with graying temples and cold eyes, scanned the room until he saw Sharon waving them over. Officer Maria Santos, younger but just as stern, followed behind. "That's her," Sharon said with satisfaction. "She's been acting suspiciously and trying to pass off what I believe is stolen money. I don't know if it's drugs or theft, but this girl is definitely hiding something." Jessica opened her mouth to speak, but Officer Walsh cut her off before a word left her lips. "We'll take it from here," he said, looking her over with an expression that felt like he'd already decided she was guilty. Jessica held up her envelope. "Please, this is birthday money. I have everything: my school ID, my birth certificate, savings account papers from this bank. Please just look." Officer Santos stepped forward and reached for her handcuffs. "Turn around," she said. "Put your hands behind your back." Jessica's breath caught in her throat. "What?" she whispered. "Why? You're being detained on suspicion of theft and fraud," Walsh replied flatly. "You can explain yourself at the station." Tears spilled down Jessica's cheeks again as she turned, shaking. The cold metal of the cuffs clicked shut behind her. It was a sound she would never forget. Around the bank, people watched, some with pity, some with confusion, but no one said a word. In that moment, Jessica didn't feel like a person. She felt like a lesson, a warning, a target. The officers began leading her toward the door, her backpack hanging from one shoulder, her documents spilling from the counter where she'd tried to prove she belonged. And just as the front doors swung open to escort her out, a different car door slammed shut across the street. It was the Bentley, deep black, sleek and silent. Its license plate, RFH0001, a code that meant power in banking circles across the country, Rodriguez Financial Holdings. The car had barely stopped moving before Angela stepped out, her heels clicking with deadly precision as she walked toward the bank entrance. Robert Torres followed behind her, scanning the area, followed by 2 additional security officers who flanked her like bodyguards for royalty inside the bank. A current of confusion ran through the staff. Customers stood, employees peeked out from behind offices. Even the officers hesitated when they saw who was coming. There was something about her walk, her clothes, her eyes. It wasn't just money. It was command. Sharon Mitchell glanced up and squinted. She saw a woman walking in like she owned the place. She rolled her eyes, not yet realizing the reality that was about to crash into her carefully built world. "Oh, great," she muttered, folding her arms. Another one. Angela didn't stop at the front desk. She walked directly to Sharon, her face unreadable, her voice quiet and sharp. "Release my daughter." The words dropped like stones into the still air. Sharon blinked. "I'm sorry, who are you?" Angela didn't answer. She simply reached into her handbag, pulled out a gold-trimmed business card, and placed it slowly on the desk. Dr. Angela Rodriguez, Williams CEO, Rodriguez Financial Holdings majority shareholder, First National Bank. Sharon stared at the card. For a full 5 seconds, she said nothing. Then slowly her face began to lose color. "You?" She started, her voice barely audible. "Yes," Angela said, stepping closer. "And you've just arrested my daughter. In a bank my family owns? On accusations so baseless and biased they'd be laughable if they weren't horrifying." Sharon swallowed. I didn't know." "No, you didn't," Angela snapped. "Because you didn't bother to check. You didn't verify her ID, you didn't call the family, you didn't look up the account. You saw a black girl with cash and made a decision. And now you're going to face the consequences." The entire bank stood frozen. And in that silence, Charles Morrison, the chairman of the board, burst through the front doors, panting, his suit slightly wrinkled from rushing. "Angela," he called. "I came as soon as my God, what's happened?" Angela turned toward him and pointed. "Your employee racially profiled my child, had her arrested, in public, in your lobby." Charles turned pale. "Where is she now?" "On her way to juvenile holding," Angela replied, her voice like steel. "Fix it." Morrison turned to Sharon, stunned. "What have you done?" But it was already too late, because in just a few minutes they would discover the security footage that changed everything, and by then Sharon's career would already be over. The moment the truth hit the screen, the silence that swept through the lobby of First National Bank was more than awkward. It was loaded, tense, almost unbearable. The kind of silence that falls just before a storm breaks. Angela stood like a monument of power in the center of the bank, her polished shoes unmoving on the marble floor, her eyes piercing Sharon Mitchell like ice. Behind her, Charles Morrison, chairman of the board and longtime steward of the Rodriguez family's banking legacy, stood pale and visibly shaken. This wasn't a small error. This was a cataclysm, a mistake that, if handled wrong, could become a headline, a lawsuit, a revolution. Sharon opened her mouth again, trying to speak, but the words caught in her throat. She was staring not just at a mother, but at a CEO, a billionaire, and more importantly, the largest stakeholder in the very institution she worked for. And she had called the police on that woman's daughter. Angela's voice was steady, calm, but terrifying in its precision. "I want my daughter released now, and I want to see every second of security footage from the moment she walked in." She didn't raise her tone. She didn't need to. Her presence was enough to shift the room. Employees who had been pretending to focus on their tasks slowly lifted their eyes. Tellers paused mid-transaction. Even customers began edging closer, phones discreetly raised, sensing something monumental was unfolding before them. Morrison sprang into action, not just out of loyalty, but out of fear. He had seen Angela navigate billion-dollar deals, turn hostile takeovers into cooperative alliances, and outmaneuver Fortune 500 CEOs like it was sport. But he had never seen her like this. Never seen her as a mother, wronged, betrayed, and burning with cold fury. He picked up the landline at the front desk and ordered the head of bank security to bring out all relevant footage immediately. "We'll watch it right here," Angela said, "so that your entire staff can understand exactly what happened to my daughter in their presence. And we'll keep the audio on." A junior manager rolled out a tall cart with a flat-screen monitor mounted on top. A security officer followed, carrying a tablet already synced to the building's camera feed. With trembling fingers, he selected the timestamp and hit play. The footage began, flickering slightly before settling into clarity. Jessica appeared on screen. She looked small next to the towering glass doors. She walked in with a smile, holding her envelope like it contained something precious. She waited patiently in line, then approached the customer service desk, Jennifer's desk. The room watched as Jennifer's expression turned instantly hostile. Her mouth moved sharply, her face hardening. Jessica's own expression, still innocent and hopeful, began to shift confusion, then anxiety. Her hands moved. She placed the documents carefully on the desk, pointed to her ID, then pulled out the birthday card. Jennifer barely looked at any of it. Instead, she picked up the phone and called for Sharon. The video played on. Sharon arrived, scanned Jessica from head to toe, and ignored the documents entirely. Instead, the footage showed her making a series of gestures, picking up the envelope, examining it without gloves, then glaring at Jessica as if she were something rotten. Angela said nothing. She simply watched, her arms folded, her face unreadable. The next segment showed Sharon on the phone, presumably with the police, while Jessica stood frozen, her hands shaking, her body slightly hunched as if preparing for something painful. Then came the police. Officers Walsh and Santos entered with visible authority. They barely spoke to Jessica. They didn't touch her papers. They didn't even glance at her ID. They simply grabbed her, spun her around, and handcuffed her like a suspect in a robbery. Her backpack swung off her shoulder. The envelope hit the floor. And Jessica turned her face toward the counter, sobbing. The footage ended there. No one in the room moved for a long moment. Then Angela turned to Morrison. "You've seen it. Your staff has seen it. Your customers have seen it. Now tell me, Mr. Morrison, what do you intend to do about it?" Morrison looked around the lobby, seeing his institution unraveling by the second. "Miss Mitchell," he said quietly, turning to Sharon, "your employment with First National Bank is hereby terminated, effective immediately." Sharon's mouth fell open. "Wait, I didn't know. She didn't look like—" Angela raised a hand and the words died. "Stop talking," she said coldly. "You already said everything you believe the moment you looked at my child. You didn't see a student. You didn't see a client. You didn't even see a little girl. You saw her skin, her hair, her age, and decided she was a threat. I don't need your apology. I need your silence." Two security guards stepped forward. Sharon turned red, then pale as they escorted her out. Customers moved aside to let her pass. Some stared. Others looked away. It was the longest walk of her life, but Angela was not done. She turned to Morrison again. "I want a full audit of all customer service interactions from the past 12 months. I want to know how many other minority customers were treated like my daughter. And I want every single employee retrained in anti-bias and youth service protocol. You have 30 days. Morrison nodded. "It will be done." "I'm not finished," Angela continued. "When I leave this bank, I'm driving to the detention center where your officers took my daughter. And when I get her out, because I'm launching an initiative under the Rodriguez Foundation. A national hotline for youth banking. Discrimination. We're going to expose this, change this, fix this, because no child, no matter what they look like, should walk into a bank and walk out in handcuffs." The words were not a threat. They were a promise. That evening, across the country, news alerts began pinging onto phones and computers. "Teen wrongfully arrested at major bank," the headlines read. "Mother of arrested girl is billionaire banking CEO." Videos taken by customers inside the bank went viral within hours. Angela's speech at the counter, recorded in full, was shared on every social media platform. Comments poured in from parents, teachers, and professionals, black, white, and everything in between, sharing their own stories, their own rage, their own hope that maybe, finally, things might begin to change. Jessica's name was not made public, per Angela's legal team's guidance. But inside the city's juvenile detention center, a quiet girl sat alone in a holding room, still in her uniform, her eyes red, her hands folded in her lap. She didn't cry anymore. She was too exhausted, too numb. The officers at the center had processed her like they had done with hundreds of kids before: name, age, weight, crime, suspicious behavior, bank fraud. The words sounded ridiculous on paper, but they still ended up in the system. Then the door opened, slowly, and standing there was her mother. Angela didn't rush. She didn't cry. She stepped inside, took her daughter's face in her hands, and whispered only 3 words: "You're going home." Jessica's arms wrapped tightly around her, and for the first time all day she finally felt safe. But what neither of them knew yet was that this wasn't just a family reunion. This was the beginning of something much bigger. Because tomorrow, the country would know Jessica's story. And nothing, especially not First National Bank, would ever be the same again. The city wakes up the morning after Jessica was released from detention. The city felt different. News vans lined up outside First National Bank before the sun even rose, their satellite dishes pointed at the sky like antennae searching for answers. Reporters rehearsed their lines in hushed voices while holding steaming cups of coffee, their eyes darting between the glass bank doors and the massive digital billboards just across the street. Because now, one of those screens, usually filled with ads for credit cards and stock tickers, was displaying something no one expected: a clip of Angela Rodriguez-Williams standing tall in the middle of the bank lobby, saying the words that had already been viewed over 10 million times online. "You didn't see a child, you saw her skin, and now you're going to face the consequences." Inside homes, offices, coffee shops, and subway cars, people watched the video on their phones, stunned by the clarity of what unfolded. Jessica had never raised her voice. She hadn't caused a scene. She had followed the rules. And still, she had ended up in handcuffs. For many, the incident wasn't shocking because it was rare. It was shocking because it was finally exposed in full. High-definition truth, from start to finish. There was no denying it. No room to explain it away. This was the kind of video that didn't just start a conversation. It started a reckoning. Meanwhile, in the penthouse office of the Rodriguez Financial Building, Angela sat at her desk, not as a mother still burning with anger, but as a leader focused on action. Her legal team had worked through the night drafting letters, filing formal complaints, and compiling a full report of what happened to Jessica. Angela's personal assistant, Monica, walked in holding a fresh folder stamped with the bank's logo. The footage was archived. Full transcript enclosed. Statement from 2 employees who witnessed it but were afraid to speak up until now, she said, placing it on the desk. Angela nodded silently, flipping through the documents with laser focus. "Any update on Officer Walsh and Santos?" She asked. Monica hesitated. "The department launched an internal review this morning. Community pressure is mounting. There's a protest forming downtown." Angela stood, closing the folder. "Then let's make sure it's not just pressure. Let's make it policy." She didn't wait. She walked to the conference room, where representatives from her foundation were already gathered: activists, attorneys, educators, and public relations strategists. A large screen at the front displayed a working logo with a bold title: Financial Justice for All. "This isn't just about Jessica," Angela said, opening the meeting. "This is about every kid who walked into a bank, a store, or a school and was seen as a problem before they even spoke. We have resources, we have power, it's time we use both." She outlined a national initiative: free legal aid for families facing discrimination in financial spaces, training for banks on how to treat young customers respectfully, and most importantly, a youth financial rights curriculum to be taught in schools, something no other foundation had ever attempted. Everyone in the room leaned forward. This wasn't just a response. It was a movement. At that same moment, across town, Sharon Mitchell sat alone in her apartment. The walls that once displayed awards and plaques now looked bare, empty, silent. Her email had been locked. Her work phone deactivated, her name scrubbed from the company's directory. The news had spread like wildfire, faster than even she had imagined. Her LinkedIn inbox was full, but not with job offers. They were messages of anger, disbelief, and in some cases, pity. "What were you thinking?" one message read. "How do you profile a child?" another said. Sharon didn't respond to any of them. She couldn't. Her hands shook every time she tried to type. She turned on the TV, hoping to escape, but there was no escape. Jessica's story was everywhere. She flipped through the channels. On one, a panel of experts discussing racial profiling in the banking sector. On another, a talk show host explaining what privilege looks like when someone can arrest a child without even looking at their ID. And on yet another, an activist holding up a sign outside the bank that read, "Justice for Jessica." Sharon turned off the TV and sat in the dark. The walls seemed to close in around her. She thought about all the little moments, every eye roll, every sarcastic tone she had used with minority clients, every time she'd demanded extra paperwork for some customers but not others. She had never thought of herself as racist. She had simply thought she was doing her job well, looking out for threats, preventing fraud. But now she was beginning to understand something painful. When you only see certain faces as a threat, you become the threat yourself. At the local precinct, Officers Walsh and Santos were called into a closed-door meeting with Internal Affairs. The room was stark, with a table, a few chairs, and a screen that displayed the bank footage once again. They were forced to watch it all: their arrival, their lack of questions, their refusal to review documents. They had walked into the bank with the assumption that Jessica was guilty. They had never even asked for her mother's phone number. They hadn't checked the account history. They hadn't treated her like a person. The lead investigator turned off the screen. "This isn't just about a bad call," she said. "This is about bias. You arrested a minor without proper investigation, and now the department is under national fire." Walsh tried to explain. He talked about intuition, about bank protocol, about past experiences, but it all sounded hollow. Santos didn't speak. She simply stared at her own hands, suddenly realizing that handcuffing a crying child might become the one thing her badge was remembered for. Both officers were suspended indefinitely. The union would fight it, but the public wasn't going to forget what they saw. Back at home, Jessica sat curled up on the couch with a blanket over her lap, her mother beside her. The TV was on mute, but the captions ran across the bottom. She saw her name blurred out for privacy, but she knew they were talking about her. "Do you want me to turn it off?" Angela asked gently. Jessica shook her head. "No," she said. "I want to know what they're saying." They sat in silence for a moment longer. Then Jessica turned to her mother. "Why did she hate?" "Me, Mom? I didn't do anything. I was nice." Angela put her arm around her. "I know you were, but people like Sharon, they don't need a reason. They've already made up their minds before they meet you." Jessica looked down at her hands. "I feel like I don't belong anywhere anymore. Like I have to prove something every time I walk into a room." Angela's heart broke at the sound of that. She had tried to protect her daughter from this world, tried to raise her with dignity, compassion, and independence. But the world had shown its true colors. And now it was her job, not just as a mother, but as a leader, to fight back. Not just for Jessica, but for every child like her. That night, Angela sat alone in her home office, staring out the window at the city lights. The skyline sparkled with energy, with ambition, with hope, and also with danger, with prejudice, and with silence. But Angela was done being silent. She opened her laptop and began typing a speech, a public address, a televised statement. One that would make headlines. One that would make people uncomfortable. But also one that would make them think, because this story wasn't just about a black girl arrested in a bank. It was about a nation. And now, it was time to wake it up. A voice that couldn't be ignored. The following morning broke through the city skyline like a spotlight cutting across the dark, bold, hot, unrelenting. But it wasn't just sunlight warming up the streets. It was tension. It was awareness. It was the city waking up to the weight of a truth it had long tried to ignore. In homes, shops, cafes, and classrooms, the name Jessica Williams had become a whisper, a headline, a conversation starter, and a mirror reflecting the deep cracks in a system that had long punished people based not on their actions, but their appearance. The footage from First National Bank had now made its way to national news outlets, played on loop across every major network. Legal analysts broke it down frame by frame. Psychologists discussed the trauma of early racial profiling. Activists flooded comment sections and talk shows with calls for action. And sitting at the center of it all, still recovering, still overwhelmed, was a 13-year-old girl who had only wanted to open her first checking account inside her home. Jessica watched the screen quietly from the living room couch. Her phone buzzed nonstop with messages from classmates, teachers, even strangers who somehow found her through mutual connections. Some messages were full of support. "You're so brave. We stand with you." Others were more complicated. "Why? Didn't you just explain better?" Or maybe they were just doing their job. But the worst ones, the hateful ones, were also there. The ones that called her a liar. The ones that said she deserved it. The ones that reminded her exactly why her mom had tried to shield her from this world in the first place. Jessica didn't respond to any of them. She didn't have the words. Instead, she just curled deeper into the couch, knees to chest, staring at her hands that had held out truth and been met with doubt. Hands that had carried innocence and been chained anyway. But upstairs, her mother was preparing something that would make sure Jessica's voice wouldn't just be heard, it would be remembered. In her office, Angela stood at the center of a sleek media setup. Lighting panels glowed above her. 2 cameras angled from the sides and a teleprompter stood directly in front. But she didn't need the prompter. She wasn't reading a script. She was speaking from fire, from truth. From a place so raw it barely needed editing. Her media director nodded from the side. "We're living 3, 2, 1. Angela looked into the lens, not like a CEO, but like a mother standing at the edge of battle. "My name is Dr. Angela Rodriguez Williams," she began, her voice steady and low. "And 2 days ago, my 13-year-old daughter walked into a bank her family owns. She walked in with money she had saved, with documents she had organized, and with a heart full of excitement. She walked in as a child and walked out in handcuffs." The video cut to footage of Jessica at the bank, silent clips. Her holding the envelope, her smiling. Then her crying. Angela's voice continued. She was treated not as a customer, not even as a human being, but as a suspect. Not because of what she did, but because of how she looked. Because of who she is. And I'm here to tell you, this isn't just about my daughter. This is about every child who has been told with a glance that they don't belong. This is about every family that's been denied dignity. This is about the cost of silence. The live stream exploded instantly. Thousands of comments poured in. Parents, educators, professionals, youth groups, all watching as a woman turned personal pain into national purpose. Angela laid out the blueprint for change. The Financial Justice for All campaign, a nationwide education program for young people, training modules for every bank that wanted to work with her firm, and a clear public promise that her daughter's name would never be forgotten, not as a victim, but as a turning point. Meanwhile, back at First National Bank, the fallout deepened. Chairman Morrison had spent the last 48 hours in emergency meetings with PR teams, legal advisors, and compliance officers. Every corner of the bank's operations was now under a microscope. A third-party civil rights organization had been brought in to conduct a full audit, not just of Sharon Mitchell's behavior, but of every policy, every hiring decision, every promotion that had quietly favored certain types of people over others. It wasn't just uncomfortable, it was revealing. In the HR department, old employee complaint files were reopened. A black teller named Denise, who had quit a year earlier, had written in her exit interview that she no longer felt safe or valued in her branch. Her concerns had been ignored. Another file showed that a Latino manager had applied for a promotion 5 times and been passed over by less qualified white colleagues. He had left the company last spring and now worked at a rival bank. His departure had never been questioned until now. One by one, the ugly truths piled up, and yet, in the middle of this corporate reckoning, something else was happening. Something powerful. Something redemptive. Messages began pouring into the bank, not just from angry customers, but from inspired ones, from people who had seen Angela's speech, from students who had experienced discrimination and now wanted to open accounts again safely, from parents who asked if their teens could be taught about their financial rights. The bank's inbox was overwhelmed not just with complaints, but with hope, with questions like, "What will you do next?" And "How can we help?" Jessica sat with her mother later that evening, watching her speech trend across every platform. Her video had reached 15 million views by then. Her face had been blurred, but her story was everywhere. Her classmates had started a campaign at school called "We Are All Jessica," and students were wearing purple ribbons in solidarity. Even the school principal had called to personally apologize for not preparing their counselors for this level of media exposure. Jessica looked at her mother and whispered, "I didn't think it would matter. I thought they'd forget about me." Angela touched her daughter's hand gently and said, "They didn't forget you. They saw you. And now they can't unsee you." But Angela wasn't done. The next morning, she did something no one expected. She returned to First National Bank, not in anger, not with cameras, but quietly, with her daughter by her side. They entered through the same glass doors. But this time, the lobby went still with respect. The staff who remained had been retrained, replaced, or reprimanded. The tone was different. The tension was gone. Jessica stood in front of the same customer service counter this time, welcomed by a young teller who smiled warmly, greeted her by name, and walked her through the process step by step. 15 minutes later, Jessica Williams had her checking account, and the young girl who had been handcuffed just days earlier now held a shiny new debit card, her name embossed in silver across the front. Her dignity fully intact, she turned to her mother and smiled, not the same smile from before. Not the naive one, but a stronger one, a wiser one, a smile that said, "I've seen the world now. And I'm still standing." Angela smiled back, but she knew the fight wasn't over, because there were millions of other Jessicas still out there waiting to be seen. The legacy of a lesson in the months that followed Jessica's wrongful arrest. Something extraordinary began to unfold, not just in her city, but across the country. What started as a single moment of injustice captured by a bank camera and multiplied across 1,000 phone screens had become the spark that ignited institutional change far beyond what anyone expected. Jessica Williams, once just another bright-eyed 8th grader hoping to open her first checking account, was now the quiet center of a national dialogue. But she wasn't famous for being loud, or for fighting back with rage. She was remembered for the quiet strength of her truth, for the dignity with which she endured humiliation, and for the power that came from simply being seen. Angela Rodriguez Williams had always known how to lead companies. She had closed international deals, managed billion-dollar assets, and negotiated with world leaders. But nothing had ever felt as personal or as meaningful as what came next. The Financial Justice for All program, born from the ashes of her daughter's experience, quickly became one of the most talked-about initiatives in the country. With Angela at the helm, the program rolled out in over 400 school districts, launching in classrooms where teenagers were taught their financial rights the same way they were taught algebra or history. Students learned how to identify discriminatory practices, how to open accounts safely, and most importantly, how to advocate for themselves when adults chose not to listen. But the work didn't stop in classrooms. Banks that partnered with the Rodriguez Foundation were offered exclusive access to modern training protocols developed by educators, sociologists, and civil rights attorneys. These weren't just optional diversity seminars. They were structured, tested, and reviewed programs that evaluated how institutions treated young clients of color, and those from underrepresented backgrounds. Failure to complete training meant public accountability monthly reports that were published online for anyone to see. For the first time, financial institutions weren't just being judged by their profit margins, they were being judged by their ethics, and at the heart of every workshop, every slide deck, every printed packet was Jessica's story. Her name wasn't always spoken, and her photo was never shown publicly without consent, but the facts were taught like gospel. A child, with money, with paperwork, Denied dignity, arrested, because of her appearance, because of someone else's assumption. And then justice, correction, reform, hope. Students watched the story unfold through reenactments, recorded interviews, and transcripts of Angela's now famous speech. Teachers didn't sugarcoat it. They allowed their students to feel the discomfort, the anger, and the reflection. And those students, many of whom had been on the receiving end of discrimination themselves, felt seen for the first time. Meanwhile, First National Bank, under the watchful eye of Chairman Morrison and the oversight of Angela's legal and civil rights teams, underwent one of the most aggressive policy restructures in modern banking history. Within 3 months, over 60 employees who had been identified in past complaints for discriminatory behavior were either retrained or dismissed. A new internal department was formed specifically focused on youth banking services, led by a diverse team that reported directly to the board. Branches across the country received new signage, new brochures, and updated guidelines outlining how to serve minor clients. Staff were trained to approach young clients with the same professionalism and patience given to adults. It was no longer acceptable to assume suspicious behavior based on someone's age, clothes, speech, or background, but it wasn't just policies that changed. It was culture. Employees began speaking up more. Junior tellers who once stayed silent about the behavior of their supervisors now had protected channels to report unethical conduct. Clients who saw discriminatory practices began documenting and sharing them, knowing there was now accountability. And those who had once felt invisible young black boys with clean sneakers and saved-up dollars, young Latina girls with school IDs and babysitting cash began walking into banks with their heads held higher. They weren't afraid anymore, because Jessica had shown them that fear didn't have to be permanent. And Angela had shown them what it looked like when someone with power chose to protect instead of punish, one quiet afternoon. Nearly 6 months after that life-changing day, Jessica stood backstage at a large youth empowerment summit hosted in Washington, D.C. She had been invited to speak not as a victim but as a voice. The ballroom buzzed with energy. Hundreds of students filled the seats, along with educators, policymakers, and community leaders. A massive screen behind the stage displayed the words, "Power begins with awareness." Jessica wasn't nervous, not like before. She stood taller now, stronger. Her speech wasn't long, it wasn't dramatic, but it was unforgettable. She walked to the podium with calm purpose, glanced at the audience, and began, "I was 13 when I learned that being prepared isn't always enough. That having your papers in order, your money counted, your smile ready, it doesn't always protect you. Not when someone has already decided who you are. But I also learned that one voice, just one, can make people look again. Think again, change. I'm not famous. I didn't do anything special. I just showed up like every young person should be allowed to do. And now, every time another kid opens an account, asks a question, or walks into a place where they were once ignored, they won't have to feel afraid. That's enough for me." The applause was thunderous. Angela watched from the wings, tears quietly filling her eyes, not from sadness, but from pride. Her daughter had faced something no child should ever have to face. And instead of letting it define her, she had turned it into something powerful, something permanent. That night, as they walked together under the soft streetlights of the Capitol, Jessica looked up at her mother and asked, "Do you think it's over now?" "That something like that won't happen again?" Angela thought for a long time before answering. "No," she said honestly. "It will happen again. Maybe not to you, maybe not in a bank. But somewhere, someone will still be judged unfairly. Because changing the world doesn't happen in a day. Or in a news cycle. It takes time." Jessica nodded slowly. "But now they know, now they see it," Angela smiled. "Yes, and now they don't get to look away." Back in her bedroom that night, Jessica placed her debit card gently inside her wallet, right next to a photo of her grandmother. The card wasn't flashy. It wasn't gold. It didn't have custom designs. But to Jessica, it was something bigger than money. It was a symbol of what she had survived, what she had sparked, what she had changed. She wasn't just the girl who got arrested for having money, she was the girl who made the world think twice, and that was a legacy no one could take from her.